before we start, one thing, as somebody who really enjoyed Joyce and struggled to understand them a little bit, but I always found the short stories, The Dubliners, was really useful. And I just want to I picked out a quote from The Dubliners, which I think explains that we as parents and past parents and teachers, I think it really captures what we try to do for the students. So this is a quote from The Dead, and it's, "A new generation is growing up in our midst, a generation actuated by new ideas and new principles. It is serious and enthusiastic for these new ideas, but we are living in a sceptical and thought-tormented age, and sometimes I fear that this new generation, educated or hyper-educated as it is, will lack the qualities of humanity, of hospitality, of kindly humour, which belonged to an older day." And I think it's really interesting that 100 years ago somebody was worrying about that. But I think our role as the Parents Association, teachers and family is to help them both have that access to the education and to those values of kindness and hospitality as well. So just to say, as a tribute to all that hospitality, the people who've really helped to make tonight possible is also the teachers, Shane Maloney, Niall Kenny, who you're going to see the wonderful students that they prepared tonight, Rory O'Daly and the Ramparts, or Rory and the Ramparts as I started calling them, who are former students of the college who've come back tonight to sing and entertain us as part of this, and will be using music that's connected to Joyce. We had the beautiful food outside that was all from the urban farm, and that was Conor Wynne, and they've also set up a wonderful nutrition programme, which the Parents Committee also, or Parents Association also supported. And then in terms of our photographers and videographers, we have Fearless Media doing the videography because we want to capture for posterity this evening's event. And also we have Seamus Ferrin, who's very kindly donated his time to take the photographs. But above all, I want to welcome our wonderful two speakers this evening, Darina Gallagher, who's the head of the Joyce Centre just down the road. If you haven't visited, please do. It's a wonderful experience. I've gone along with the family and it's a really wonderful experience. And many of you will know Father Bruce Bradley, former headmaster and Joycean scholar. And they're going to have a conversation, and then the voice of Joyce is going to be brought to life through the school children that are here today. So enjoy yourselves, and thank you all very much for coming along and supporting this.
I feel like we're on the Late Late Show. Could I be the next host? This is such a privilege for me. Welcome Jerry Foley, members of the committee that are doing such a wonderful job. So many past pupils and parents of past pupils, and of course students and present parents here this evening. This is a really unique celebration. We were just talking together beforehand that really this hasn't been done before, or not very often, and not maybe in this way. And we're really, really honoured to have the boys performing this evening, the students from 4th, 5th and 6th year, and of course music. Joyce loved music so much. My name is Darina Gallagher, and I'm director of the James Joyce Centre, just down the road, a few metres down the road, so you're all really welcome, number 35 North Great Georgia Street. And I've been pretty evangelical about trying to make Joyce accessible, and especially to young audiences. Really, I found that I really didn't want Joyce to be something aloof or abstract or elite, that he should be for everybody, and his writing is for all of us. Before I start, and we start the evening with the readings and the songs, I'm truly privileged to be sitting beside Father Bruce Bradley. Father Bruce is one of the leading experts in Ireland on James Joyce and education particularly, and his experience within the Jesuit community at all levels of his education. Father Bruce is a Dubliner by upbringing. He attended Belvedere College and is a graduate in ancient classics in University College Dublin and St John's College Cambridge, from which he holds a doctorate in divinity. Much of his working life has been spent in Jesuit schools, where he taught English, religion and ancient classics. He was headmaster here in Belvedere. Some of his former pupils are here. I hope they're not too scared sitting in the audience. He was headmaster here from 1984 to 1992, and then of Clongoweswood College from 1992 to 2000. He's also served for a year as Director of Communications in the Archdiocese of Dublin. But it is Joyce that has held a special interest for so much of his life. And his book, somewhere, I think we put it away, did we? I've been privileged enough to have a copy of the book that Father Bruce wrote on James Joyce's school days, published way back in 1982 for the centenary of Joyce's birth. More recently, he contributed an extended biographical entry on the writer to the multi-volume Dictionary of Irish Biography in 2009. And in 2011, he took up the editorship of Studies, the quarterly journal published by Messenger Publications, the publishing organisations of the Irish Jesuits. And I'm sure you do so much else, but at the moment, I'm going to hand this over to you because I want to hear you.
Good evening. Is that working? Can you hear me? Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be here on this occasion, as Trina has just said. I think it is rather unique. I've been interested in Joyce and Joyce's school days in particular since I was here myself in the 1950s. And it has been, for a long time, a kind of a no-go area. Latterly, of course, the taboo is gone, but he wasn't spoken of or introduced to us at all when we were at school. And just a small vignette, when he died in 1941, there was discussion in the community about whether there should be an entry on his life, an obituary, in the Belvedere. And it was solemnly decided there should not. He was world famous by then, the author of Ulysses and all the rest. And just to add to the irony, I must go on now, but his brother Charlie died a few days after him. He got an elaborate obituary. Those are the times. I want to just say something quickly, because I want to get out of the way for the readings and the boys, just about Joyce's life and the context of his time here, which everyone knows now, I think, that he was in Belvedere, but they don't know that much about the experience. So he came here on the 6th of April, 1893, which, if you think about it, is almost exactly 130 years ago to the day as we gather on this 11th of May in 2023. College was 62 years old at that time, and he was just 11. It was a much smaller school. It's very hard to think away all the buildings that are developed now. Belvedere House, of course, was the centre of it, and across the yard from Belvedere House was half of what we now know as the senior school. I think we call it the Finlay building. Just half of that was the school, and there was a garden in between, and running along what was the west side, there was a gymnasium which also functioned, a theatre which also functions as a gymnasium. It's where the Kerr Wing is now. That was still there when I was at school myself into the 60s. And then on this side there was just a covered arcade, which is mentioned in one of the readings that you'll hear. And that was it. That was the school. So all the developments that we are familiar with, they weren't there at all. There were about 180 students in the school. That's all. Just the bit of the Finlay building, the half of the senior school that I've mentioned, on the ground floor of that was the chapel. Directly opposite where the chapel is now. The chapel that we know wasn't there at all. The ground floor was the chapel. The floor above it was a tiered science laboratory, if you please. And on the top floor, there were 4 classrooms. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. There's a reference to number 2 in one of the readings we'll hear. And they were the grade classrooms. There were 4 public examinations in Joyce's time: preparatory, junior, middle, and senior grade, and he did them all. And the 4 classrooms were the accommodation for the students doing those exams. I don't know what those 4 classrooms are now. They should have plaques on them, or at least one of them should have a plaque to say James Joyce did his senior grade exam in this room, with 3 others. But anyway, that's another day's work. The family at that time he was just coming across Mountjoy Square from Fitzgibbon Street, if you know that, just down the hill there down towards Coke Park. They lived in number 14. They'd only arrived there a month before. They were on the move a lot at that time. There were 9 children in the house, and there would be a 10th born while Joyce was here. And there have been a number of misbirths or stillborn children. The exact number is not clear. The poor mother was pregnant almost throughout her marriage. She died in her early 40s. very difficult marriage, progressively difficult marriage. So James was the oldest surviving child. There was one older who died quickly. 4 boys and 6 girls. And the 6 girls got a raw deal. The father was very proud of James and very interested in him, not very interested in the other boys and not interested at all in the girls. And Joyce has some derisory reference somewhere to my 23 sisters, which tells you something. His brother Stanley came with him the day he was admitted here, a few years younger, 2 years younger, a bit more than 2 years younger, and 2 further brothers, George and Charlie, came after him. George died when he was just 14 in the school. They were all free boys because the family circumstances had collapsed progressively. Plenty of wealth to begin with, and then, as Richard Ellman, who's Joyce's great biographer, says, he filled his house with children and debts. He didn't hold on to a job, and I won't go into that because I'm going to get off the stage now as quickly as I can. So the family were always on the move. Stanislaus, in his own memoir, My Brother's Keeper, talks about our gypsy-like life. There were 4 different addresses while James Joyce was in school here. Began at Fitzgibbon Street, and then they moved to, I'm going to garble the order now, but they were in Drumcondra, they were in Fairview, and they were in North Richmond Street. And those are the backgrounds to some stories that we know. So always on the move, money in short supply. And Fitzgibbon Street, again, to quote Ellman says, Fitzgibbon Street was the last of his good addresses, so they were going down progressively after that, usually not paying the rent and changing before they were caught by the landlord and moving on. The father was drinking. I said the poor woman was continually pregnant and losing children as well. So it was a progressively very unhappy family background. You need to be aware of that as you think of the genius that was blossoming in it. At one stage, I must stop now in a minute, but at one stage they went to an Ibsen play in Dublin. Ibsen was all the rage and very much a hero of Joyce's. And Joyce said solemnly to his parents that you're nurturing a genius in your own home. Well, they were, of course, but nobody knew it. I mentioned the system of preparatory grade, junior, middle, senior grade. They were the 4 public exams, and he sat them all. He did very well, progressively less well as he focused all his interest in English, but he was winning prizes. The system was that the pupil who did very well got a prize, and the school got a money grant in the light of successful pupils. This was so much the case that when he appeared as a winner in the junior grade, 2 Dominicans came from Newbridge to see could they snare him down to their school. Anyway, it's in Portrait, I think, where the father says he started with the Jesuits, let him end with them. That's what he did. But his performances, as I say, focused more and more on English. He began to read widely, not covering the course, and he began to write poetry and short stories or silhouettes, little sketches. There were harbingers of what was to come, but that was not yet really very public. Only his brother perhaps knew. He would talk about my tormented youth, referring to the years in Belvedere, because he was not only intellectually precocious, but as perhaps you know, he was sexually precocious as well, and he got himself into all kinds of tangles. Simultaneously with being the prefect of sodality of Our Lady, which was the highest honour in the school, and was the equivalent of captain of the school, and he held that position for 2 years. And he was in great inner turmoil, because there was a reality about his religious devotion, but there was a reality about the other devotion as well, which I don't know what won out really. That was always an interest of mine, but I won't go on. So, as you know, the 4 great books he wrote were Dubliners, published in 1914, A Portrait of the Artist, which is somewhat relevant to what we are doing tonight, in 1916, Ulysses, which is his famous book, in 1922, and then it's obscure and not much read, Finnegan's Wake. Darina probably knows all about it, but I don't. Do? So that's really all. I'll make way now for the performance. It's a wonderful thing we're doing, because as I say, we've never quite done this for Joyce before. And I'd say he's cheering in the aisles.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to begin our selection of readings. I had such fun thinking about how to introduce Joyce and Belvedere to the students that are going to read for us. But then I realised Joyce has done all that. He has poured so much of his own life in Belvedere into his work, particularly, as Father Bruce said, into a portrait of the artist as a young man. So if you haven't read it, I have a few copies here. Really, it talks about his childhood and his life here at Belvedere. So this is I've got some wonderful images, so I've been lucky enough to scan them, and this is the school register for April 6th. So we see James and Stanislas, James Augustine Joyce, and Stanislas Joyce, and being enrolled into Belvedere. The family circumstances had declined. I don't know if you noticed some of the little images that went up first of young Joyce going to Clongowes in the beautiful Victorian family portrait of the golden child with his doting parents. But things were turning for the worse for the family. He had to be removed from Clongowes. They could no longer pay the fees. And sometime in 1892, sorry.
Just to say something about that, he finally left when they couldn't pay the fees anymore, and the last fee remains unpaid. And there's a record of it. And recently, a friend of mine was talking to a colleague who wrote a book on Dubliners, and Stephen James Joyce, Joyce's grandson, whom you may know, was notoriously litigious about Joyce and chased everybody for any hint of infringing copyright, which he held on tenaciously. He pursued this man because he quoted from the work, and he wanted recompense. And the man eventually said, "Well, I will pay you recompense, but I'm not going to pay it to you. I'm going to send it down to Clongowes."
So it is extraordinary that tonight is the whole evening is to support young people that may be in difficulty in their own lives and wouldn't be able to normally afford the fees. Coming into Dublin City, Joyce had lived in beautiful Bray, he'd lived in Blackrock, and this new dark city was overwhelming for these young boys. James was 11 years old and Stanislas was just 8 years old. He talks about this in a portrait of the artist as a young man. Dublin was a new and complex sensation, the sudden flight from the comfort and reverie of Blackrock, the passage through the gloomy, foggy city, the thought of that bare, cheerless house in which they were now to live made his heart heavy. He timidly explored the neighbourhood and passed unchallenged along the docks and quays. The vastness and strangeness of this new, bustling life amazed him. His father, who in Portrait of the Artist is called Simon Dedalus, assures him, "Oh, we're not dead yet, sonny. No, by Lord Jesus, God forgive me, not half dead." But as Father Bruce said that his brother Stanislas often recalled later in life, that the rapid downhill slide to almost abject poverty began when we left Blackrock for Dublin. But the fortuitous meeting with the incredible Father Comney, who Joyce had experience of as a little boy in Clongowes, and he had moved into Dublin City as well and had met with Joyce's father just by chance in the corner of Mountjoy Square, and he took them in and enrolled them in this year. This meeting is now going to be read for us because it's recounted in a portrait of the artist, and we're going to have Leo Scanlon read this passage from Portrait of the Artist. Thanks, Leo.
But his long spell of leisure and liberty was drawing to its end. One evening, his father came home full of news which kept his tongue busy all through dinner. Stephen had been awaiting his father's return for there had been mutton hash that day, and he knew that his father would make him dip his bread in the gravy. But he did not relish the hash, for the mention of clongos had coated his palate with the scum of disgust. "I walked bang into him," said Mr. Dedalus for the fourth time, "just at the corner of the square." "Then I suppose," said Mrs. Dedalus, "he will be able to arrange it. I mean about Belvedere." "Of course he will," said Mr. Dedalus. "Don't I tell you he's a provincial of the order now?" "I never liked the idea of sending him to the Christian Brothers myself," said Mrs. Dedalus. "Christian Brothers be damned," said Mr. Dedalus. "Is it with Paddy Stink and Mickey Mudd?" "No, let him stick to the Jesuits in God's name, since he began with them. They'll be of service to him in after years. Those are the fellows that can get you a position." "And they're a very rich order, aren't they, Simon?" "Rather. They live well, I tell you. You saw their table at Clongowes, fed up, by God, like gamecocks." Mr. Dedalus pushed his plate over to Stephen and bade him finish what was on. "Now then, Stephen," he said, "you must put your shoulder to the wheel, old chap. You've had a fine long holiday." "Oh, I'm sure he'll work very hard now," said Mrs. Dedalus, "especially when he was Morris with them." "Oh, holy Paul! I forgot about Morris," said Mr. Dedalus. "Here, Morris, come here, you thick-headed ruffian. Do you know I'm going to send you to a college where they'll teach you how to spell C-A-T, cat. And I'll buy you a nice little penny handkerchief to keep your nose dry. Now won't that be grand fun?" Morris grinned at his father, and then at his brother. Mr. Dedalus screwed his glass into his eye and stared hard at both his sons. Stephen mumbled his bread without answering his father's gaze. "By the by," said Mr. Dedalus at length, "the rector, or provincial rather, was telling me a story about you and Father Dolan. You're an impudent thief," he said. "Oh, he didn't, Simon." "Not he," said Mr. Dedalus, "but he gave me a great account of the whole affair. We were chatting, you know, and one word borrowed another. And, by the way, who do you think he told me will get that job in the corporation? But I'll tell you after. Well, as I was saying, we were chatting away, quite friendly, and he asked me did our friend here still wear glasses, and then he told me the whole story." "And was he annoyed, Simon?" "Annoyed? Not he, manly little chap," he said. Mr. Dedalus imitated the mincing, nasal tone of the provincial. "Father Dolan and I, when I told them all at dinner about it, Father Dolan and I had a great laugh over it. 'You better mind yourself, Father Dolan,' said I, 'or young Dedalus will send you up for twice 9. We had a famous laugh together over it. Ha ha ha.'" Mr. Dedalus turned to his wife and interjected in his natural voice. "Shows you the spirit in which they take the boys there. Oh, a Jesuit for life, for diplomacy." He reassumed the provincial's voice and repeated, "I told them all at dinner about it, and Father Dolan and I, and all of us, we had a hearty laugh together over it. Ha ha ha."
So here we have Father Comley, a lovely picture of him, and he looks like a pretty lovely, warm character, which I imagine he was. He appears again in Joyce's most famous work, Ulysses, which just turned 100. Happy birthday, Ulysses. I realised there was a big soccer match today. Was there that Belvedere one? Very well done, guys. And anyone on the team. The very start of Ulysses, for anyone who knows, is Buck Mulligan, stately, plump Buck Mulligan, who's based on Oliver St. John Gogarty, who was around the corner, went to school with the Christian Brothers, God love him. But he was a soccer player and played for Bohemians. So, yeah, maybe if you'd got him up to Belvedere, they would have been playing more soccer. But Father Comley, in Ulysses, of course, it's been considered a masterpiece of literature, one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. But unlike Homer's Odyssey, which takes 20 years around the Mediterranean, Joyce's Odyssey only takes one day. the 16th of June, 1904, and the day we now call Bloomsday. So I hope you're all going to get your hats and celebrate the 16th of June down with us down the road. It's called Bloomsday after the main character, Leopold Bloom, who lived just around the corner in his fictional address, but it's a real place, 7 Eccles Street. By 1904, the real Father Comely had moved from Belvedere and was appointed the superior of St. Francis Xavier's community in Gardner Street. And this is where we meet him in the Wandering Rocks episode of Ulysses. He's beginning his own wandering, Father Comely, and he meets boys from Belvedere, and he also meets Bessie Sheehy, who's the wife of David Sheehy, the MP, who lives around the corner again, all the neighbours on 2 Belvedere Place. The Sheehy family were friends of the Joyce family, and Eugene was very close to Joyce in Belvedere College. His sister, of course, was Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, and whose husband was a friend when Joyce went on to UCD. And the family enjoyed sharing songs and stories around in the happy place that was the Sheehy family home. In this extract that we're about to hear also, we hear that Father Comely is going to Artane to help the young son of the recently deceased Paddy Dignam. And that's the funeral that Leopold Bloom attends in Glasnevin Cemetery. So like Joyce's own life, Father Comely is assisting another child in need. So please welcome to read this passage, Ollie McLaughlin. Thank you.
The Superior, the Very Reverend John Conmee S.J., reset his smooth watch in his interior pocket as he came down the presbytery steps. 5 to 3. Just nice time to walk to Artane. What was that boy's name again? Dignam, yes. Vere dignum et iustum est. Brother Swan was the person to see. Mr. Cunningham's letter, yes. Oblige him, if possible. Good practical Catholic, useful at mission time. A one-legged sailor, swinging himself onward by lazy jerks of his crutches, growled some notes. He jerked short before the convent of the Sisters of Charity and held out a peaked cap for alms towards the Very Reverend John Conmee S.J. Father Conmee blessed him in the sun, for his purse held, he knew, 1 silver crown. Father Conmee crossed to Mountjoy Square. He thought, but not for long, of soldiers and sailors whose legs had been shot off by cannonballs, ending their days in some pauper ward, and of Cardinal Wolsey's words, "If I had served my God as I have served my King, he would not have abandoned me in my old days." He walked by the tree shade of sunny winking leaves, and towards him came the wife of Mr. David Sheehy, MP. "Very well indeed, Father. And you, Father?" Father Conmee was wonderfully well indeed. He would go to Buxton, probably for the waters. And her boys, were they getting on well at Belvedere? Was that so? Father Conmee was very glad indeed to hear that. And Mr. Sheehy himself? Still in London. The house was still sitting, to be sure it was. Beautiful weather it was, delightful indeed. Yes, it was very probable that Father Bernard Vaughan would come again to preach. Oh yes, a very great success. A wonderful man, really. Father Conmee was very glad to see the wife of Mr. David Sheehy MP looking so well, and he begged to be remembered to Mr. David Sheehy MP. Yes, he would certainly call. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Sheehy." Father Conmee doffed his silk hat and smiled as he took leave at the jet beads of her mantilla ink shining in the sun, and smiled again in going. He had cleaned his teeth, he knew, with Aricont paste. Father Conmee walked and, walking, smiled, for he thought on Father Bernard Vaughan's droll eyes and cockney voice. "Pilot, why don't you hold back that howling mob?" A zealous man, however, really he was, and really did great good in his way, beyond a doubt. He loved Ireland, he said, and he loved the Irish. Of good family too, would one think it. Welsh, were they not? Oh, lest he forget, that letter to Father Provincial. Father Conmee stopped 3 little schoolboys at the corner of Mountjoy Square. Yes, they were from Belvedere, the little house. Aha! And were they good boys at school? Oh, that was very good now. And what was his name? Jack Sohan. And his name? Ger Gallagher. And the other little man? His name was Brunny Lynham. Oh, that was a very nice name to have. Father Conmee gave a letter from his breast to Master Brunny Lynham and pointed to the red pillar box at the corner of Fitzgibbon Street. But mind you don't post yourself into the box, little man, he said. The boy's sick-eyed father conned me and laughed. Oh, sir. Well, let me see if you can post a letter, Father Conmee said. Master Brunny Nyland ran across the road and put Father Conmee's letter to Father Provincial into the mouth of the bright red letterbox. Father Conmee smiled and nodded and smiled and walked along Mount Joyce Square East.
Next we have a real treat. James Joyce loved music and had a fine tenor voice, and he fills his literature with music. His characters are constantly singing or thinking about song lyrics or humming a tune. He was a musical magpie for everything from folk music to opera. He had singing lessons from Vincent O'Brien down at the Palestrina Choir that had just started. And he performed in the Feis Ceoil, famously coming third to Count John McCormack, but he could have won if his sight reading had been a bit better. The song that we're going to sing here now, sung by the Ramparts Choir, is Down by the Sally Gardens. And this song is very important to Joyce. Of course, he loved W.B. Yeats, but this was his courting song for himself and Nora Barnacle when he first met her in that fateful summer of 1904. He sang this song for her at a concert in the ancient concert rooms that's now on Pier Street. So without further ado, thank you so much, guys. I'm going to put this microphone for you. So much. That was really wonderful. As Nora said, he wasn't very impressed with Joyce's books. Maybe he should have stuck to the singing. And so to life in Belvedere. Father Bruce, this is what you were describing. The schoolhouse, and the building with the classrooms, 1, 2, 3 and 4 at the top. And this side would have been the gymnasium / theatres. Oh, this side. And so this was just the little, the arcade. Okay, so this side was the gymnasium and and the school day began at 9:30 with Mass. And 4 classes a day, each lasting an hour. Morning class began at 10 a.m. and at midday, beads were said in the chapel, which would have been on the ground floor, and the senior school building referred to as the schoolhouse. But you called it Finley House, did you?
Finley is the one who changed Belvedere. This place school started out in Hardwick Street in 1832, as you know. They moved into Belvedere House in 1841, and he came in 1884, 1883, and he's the one who built the building. He built that building over there, he built the gymnasium theatre, and developed games and did a lot of things like that. So we called it, subsequently we called it the Finley Building. The other half of it was built in 1928 or 29. We just know it's a big long building, but the second half is much later than the part you're looking there.
But one of the major influences in Joyce's life at this time was the English teacher, George Dempsey. And he picked him out early as a talented writer and encouraged him. Like all good English teachers, where are they? Where are they all? And I can see the work that's been done here with these incredible boys. He informed the rector that Joyce was a boy with a plethora of ideas in his head, and he'd set an essay title for the other students, and then he would say, Joyce, you can write whatever you like. He even used to tease Joyce about his middle name, Augustine, and called him Gussie. Eugene Sheehy, whose mother was in the story, remembers this teacher, George Dempsey, as rather tall, thin, who presented the appearance of a retired army officer. There he is. His pupils irreverently called him, "Do you see?" from his favourite expression, but the boys respected him. Joyce sat near the window in the front desk of the left row facing the teacher, which might have had something to do with his eyesight, which was a problem for him for his whole life, but probably also reflected his academic position in the class. Another school friend, John F. Byrne, recounts that in English class, a few composers would be asked by Dempsey to read their lubrications, and among those, James Joyce was one of the most frequently called upon. Joyce was a good reader, like our readers here, and while he read, Dempsey would literally wriggle and chuckle with delight. In this extract, Tim O'Leary will read once again from a portrait of the artist, where Mr. Dempsey is renamed as Mr. Tate. Thank you, Tim.
The essay was for him, the chief labour of his week, and every Tuesday, as he marched from home to the school, he read his fate in the incidents of the way, pitting himself against some figure ahead of him, and quickening his pace to outstrip it before a certain goal was reached, or planting his steps scrupulously in the spaces of the patchwork, the pathway, and telling himself that he would be first and not first in a weekly essay. On a certain Tuesday, the course of his triumphs was rudely broken. Mr. Tate, the English master, pointed his finger at him and said bluntly, "This fellow has heresy in his essay." A hush fell on the class. Mr. Tate did not break it, but dug with his hand between his thighs, while his heavily starched linen creaked about his neck and wrists. Stephen did not look up. It was a raw spring morning, and his eyes were still smarting and weak. He was conscious of failure and of detection, of the squalor of his own mind and home, and felt against his neck the raw edge of his turned and jagged collar. A short, loud laugh from Mr. Tate set the class more at ease. "Perhaps you didn't know that," he said.
Where?
Asked Stephen. Mr. Tate withdrew his delving hand and spread out the essay. "Here, it's about the creator and the soul. Without a possibility of ever approaching nearer." That's it. Stephen murmured, "I meant without a possibility of ever reaching." It was a submission, and Mr. Tate, appeased, folded up the essay and passed it across him, saying, ever reaching. That's another story.
Joyce was a brilliant student in mastering Italian, French, Latin, and excelling in English composition. In his first full year at Belvedere in 1894, Joyce began his studies for the preparatory first level intermediate exam. The English course for the examinations included Charles Lamb's Adventures of Ulysses, which was to inspire him throughout his life, and particularly in his writing of this big blue book of Eccles. Years later, he told his Italian translator, Carlo Lunati, "The figure of Ulysses has always fascinated me since I was a boy." But for the 12-year-old Joyce, home life was becoming more fractured and chaotic. They'd been forced to move again, this time to Milbourne Avenue in Drumcondra, and this was Joyce's 7th home of his life. John Joyce was selling off the last of his property that he inherited down in Cork. He had been quite well off, but was failing to get employment and continuing to drink. So the two things were really squandering all the money that he had inherited. The house moving had been noticed by fellow pupils, and a schoolmate named Fallon asked him with a silly laugh in his voice, "Why are we on the move again, if it's a fair question?" Joyce did not give him the answer he gave his sister when she asked where their parents had gone. "Because borough, the borough, land borough, lord borough, put borough, us borough, out borough." Despite all this, Joyce did well in the examination, winning a prize of £20. And with his winnings, he brought his parents out to expensive restaurants and to the theatre. For his brothers and sisters, he bought practical presents, boots, a dress. And when the money was all spent, the household went back to its usual way of life. We are very lucky to still have some of Joyce's writing from school at that time. Kieran Healy is now going to read Joyce's response to one of the essay topics that Joyce was given, called "Trust Not Appearances."
Trust, not appearances. There is nothing so deceptive, and for all that so alluring, as a good surface. The sea, when beheld in the warm sunlight of a summer's day. The sky, blue in the faint and damper glimmer of an autumn sun, are pleasing to the eye. But how different the sea, when the wild anger of the elements has waked again the discord of confusion. How different the ocean, choking with froth and foam, to the calm, placid sea that glanced and rippled merrily in the sun. But the best examples of filthiness of appearances are man and fortune. The cringing, servile look, the high and haughty mien, alike conceal the worthlessness of the character. Fortune, that glittering bauble, whose brilliant shimmer has allured and trifled with both proud and poor, is as wavering as the wind. Still, however, there is a something that tells us the character of a man. It is the eye, the only treasure that even the sternest will of a fiendish villain cannot overcome. It is the eye that reveals to man the guilt or innocence, the vices or virtues of the soul. This is the only exception to the proverb, trust, not appearance. In every other case, the real worth has to be searched for. The garb of royalty or of democracy are but the shadow that a man leaves behind him. Oh, how unhappy is that poor man that hangs on princes' favours. The fickle tide of ever-changing fortune brings with it good and evil. How beautiful it seems to the harbinger of good, and how cruel is the messenger of ill. The man who waits in the temper of a king is but a tiny craft in that great ocean. Thus we see the hollowness of appearances. The hypocrite is the worst kind of villain, yet, under the appearance of virtue, he conceals the worst of vices. The friend who is but the fane of fortune fawns and grovels at the feet of wealth. But the man who has no ambition, no wealth, no luxury, save contentment, cannot hide the joy of happiness that flows from clear conscience and easy mind. Luce Dio Semper, James A. Joyce.
Our next reading is from An Encounter, the second story in James Joyce's collection of short stories, Dubliners. The story forms the middle part of the 3 childhood stories in the book between the sisters and Araby, which some of you may know. It's also based on a true story that was told by Joyce's younger brother Stanislavs, where James wasn't always a goody two-shoes. Well, we heard about his other misdemeanors, but he was certainly able to mess and do bold things when he felt like it. This time he was playing truant. He was dossing off school for a day from Belvedere. So the 2 brothers planned an expedition along the Strand as far as Ringsend and the Pigeon House, the power plant that's serving Dublin. A little note about some of the characters in the reading. We have Joe Dillon here. That was a lovely picture. It was interesting in Father Bruce's book to learn about so many of Joyce's friends. I mean, we're thinking about this chaotic and fractured home life and the trauma of that, and yet this school was such a source of friendship and security and fun, stability. So many of the friends appear in so much of the writing. So this is a character called Joe Wilkins, but in the story he appears as Joe Dillon. And his younger brother Leo was a classmate of Joyce's in Belvedere. And everyone was amazed when he joined the priesthood. Everyone got the big shocker, the land that Joe Wilkins joined the priesthood. Nevertheless, it was true. And Father Butler in the story is based on Father William Henry, who took over as rector and prefect of studies at Belvedere from 1894 till 1990. So I'd like to welcome Pierce Spowers to read from An Encounter.
It was Joe Dillon who introduced the Wild West to us. He had a little library made up of old numbers of the Union Jack, Pluck, and the Halfpenny Marvel. Every evening after school, we met in his back garden and arranged Indian battles. He and his fat young brother Leo, the idler, held the loft of the stable while we tried to carry it by storm, or we fought a pitched battle on the grass. But, however well we fought, we never won siege or battle, and all our bouts ended with Joe Dillon's war dance of victory. His parents went to 8 o'clock Mass every morning in Gardiner Street, and the peaceful odor of Mrs. Dillon was prevalent in the hall of the house. But he played too fiercely for us, who were younger and more timid. He looked like some kind of Indian when he capered round the garden, an old tea cozy on his head, beating a tin with his fist and yelling, "Ya! Yaka, yaka, yaka!" Everyone was incredulous when it was reported that he had a vocation for priesthood. Nevertheless, it was true. A spirit of unruliness diffused itself among us, and, under its influence, differences of culture and constitution were waived. We banded ourselves together, some boldly, some in jest, and some almost in fear, and of the number of these latter, the reluctant Indians who were afraid to seem studious or lacking in robustness, I was one. The adventures related in the literature of the Wild West were remote from my nature, but at least they opened doors of escape. I liked better some American detective stories, which were traversed from time to time by unkempt, fierce, and beautiful girls. Though there was nothing wrong in these stories, and though their intention was sometimes literary, they were circulated secretly at school. One day, when Father Butler was hearing the 4 pages of Roman history, clumsy Leo Dillon was discovered with a copy of the Halfpenny Marvel. "This page or this page? This page? Now, Dillon, up." Hardly had the day... Go on, what day? Hardly had the day dawned. "Have you studied it? What have you there in your pocket?" Everyone's heart palpitated as Leo Dillon handed up the paper, and everyone assumed an innocent face. Father Butler turned over the pages, frowning. "What is this rubbish?" he said. "The Apache chief. Is this what you read instead of studying your Roman history? Let me not find any more of this wretched stuff in this college. The man who wrote it, I suppose, was some wretched fellow who writes these things for a drink. I'm surprised at boys like you, educated, reading such stuff. I could understand if you were national school boys. Now, Dylan, I advise you strongly, get at your work. This rebuke during the sober hours of school paled much of the glory of the Wild West for me, and the confused, puffy face of Leo Dillon awakened one of my consciences. But when the restraining influence of the school was at a distance, I began to hunger again for wild sensations, for the escape which those chronicles of disorder alone seemed to offer me. The mimic warfare of the evening became at last as wearisome to me as the routine of school in the morning, because I wanted real adventures to happen to myself. But real adventures, I reflected, do not happen to people who remain at home. They must be sought abroad. The summer holidays were near at hand when I made up my mind to break out of the weariness of school life for one day at least. With Leo Dillon and a boy named Mahoney, I planned a day's mitching. Each of us saved up sixpence. We were to meet at 10 in the morning on the canal bridge. Mahoney's big sister was to write an excuse for him, and Leo Dillon was to tell his brother to say that he was sick. We arranged to go along the wharf road until we came to the ships, then to cross in the ferry boat and walk up to see the pigeon house. Leo Dillon was afraid we might meet Father Butler, someone out of the college, but Mahoney asked very sensibly, what would Father Butler be doing at the pigeon house? We were reassured, and I brought the first stage of the plot to an end by collecting sixpence from the other two, at the same time showing them my own sixpence. When we were making the last arrangements on the eve, we were all vaguely excited. We shook hands, laughing, and Mahoney said, "Till tomorrow, mates." That night I slept badly. In the morning, I was first comer to the bridge as I lived nearest. I hid my books in the long grass near the ash pit at the garden, where nobody ever came, and hurried along the canal bank. It was a mild, sunny morning in the very first week of June. I sat up on the coping of the bridge, admiring my frail canvas shoes, which I had diligently pipe-clayed overnight, and watching the docile horses pulling a tramload of business people up the hill. All the branches of the tall trees which lined the mall were gay with little green leaves, and the sunlight slanted through them onto the water. The granite stone of the bridge was beginning to be warm, and I began to pat it with my hands in time to an air in my head. I was very happy.
During his final years at Belvedere, the Joyce family lived in relative stability, moving to number 13 Richmond Street, which Joyce writes about in his short story Araby. And here the friendship with the Sheehy family would have blossomed, and evenings would have been full of singing and plays and laughter. Joyce, here is the examination hall, and Joyce continued to do well in examinations and was awarded more cash prizes. I think we have a slide of his results. Yeah. So you'll be relieved to hear that Joyce didn't do that well in his results in the examinations. So there's hope for your boys yet. The standard must have been quite low, really, in the state exams. And actually, what we don't have here was mathematics. He was doing quite well in even though he didn't pursue that later. But you can see English and French and Italian, the languages he loved, and looking towards Europe as a means to escape, perhaps was creeping in here through the past and through his future. On his return to school after the summer break of 1896, he was singled out, as Father Bruce had said, for special honour, being elected as prefect of the sodality, which was more or less considered as head boy of the school. And he was re-elected the following year. Here's a picture. I wonder, can you pick out which one is his choice? He doesn't look very happy, does he, there? Yeah. I really like this photograph, though, of the sodality. Joyce began writing prose and poetic works with earnest around this time, and his first collection of poems was called Moods, influenced once again by one of his heroes, although he claimed to dismiss him, W.B. Yeats. There's only one example of verse that survives from this time. It's a translation Joyce did of Horace's ode, O Fons Banduse. And we'll now hear Evan Darby recite Joyce's poem.
Whiter than glass, Bandusian spring, for mellow wine and flowers meet. The morrow day a kid shall bring boding of rivalry and sweet love in his swelling forms. In vain he, wanton offspring, deep shall stain thy clear cold streams with crimson rain. The raging dog stars season thou, still safe from in the heat of day. When oxen, weary of the plough, yields thankful cool for herds that stray. Be of the noble founts, I sing, the oak tree o'er thine echoing crags, thy waters murmuring.
And you just see here, before it goes, the things that exist around the building, from the fabulous display cases that you may or may not have noticed on your way out of the theatre, and also the list of sodality prefects. We have the names James Joyce, and then also Eugene Sheehy, and also Stanislas Joyce, that was sodality prefect for 2 years. And here we have Leo Wilkins, who appears as Leo Dillon in The Encounter as his second assistant, and Albrecht Connolly, who we're about to meet now as the character of Huron in the school play. For our final piece, we're going to go back to a portrait of the artist. The school play, just like today, was one of the highlights of the school year, and in 1898, Joyce's final year, the entertainment was preceded by a gymnastic display, letting parents see the fruitful results of the new addition to the school curriculum, and rather sweetly some Neapolitan dancing. Pretty random. And then they had the school play. This is the theatre set up for a school play. I don't think it was for vice versa. I think it was a few years earlier from that photograph. The play in question was called Vice Versa, and Joyce got the role of headmaster, Dr. Grimstone. As Joyce was a great mimic, he couldn't resist the temptation to take off the rector, Father Henry. According to Eugene Sheehy, Joyce proceeded to disregard his lines and mimic the rector's pet sayings, gestures and mannerisms, often for 5 minutes at a time. And not surprisingly, the cast just fell about laughing and completely lost their cues. But luckily, Father Henry, like the rest of the audience, appeared to have found the whole thing highly amusing. This is Albrecht Connolly, who appears as Huron, who was a pretty clever guy in Joyce's class and kind of his arch enemy academically and in every way. And these are the Sheehy brothers, Eugene and Vincent, there in the centre, who were part of the gymnastics display at the beginning of the entertainment. I'd now like to welcome Cameron Simpson, Ollie McLaughlin, Evan Wyatt and Pierce Bowers onto the stage, where we will reenact, there's Joyce as Dr. Grimstone there in the middle. So lads, if you want to come on, we'll start the play.
The night of the Whitsuntide play had come, and Stephen, from the window of the dressing room, looked out on the small grass plot across which lines of Chinese lanterns were stretched. He watched the visitors come down the steps from the house and pass into the theatre. Stewards in evening dress, old Belvedereans, loitered in groups about the entrance to the theatre and ushered in the visitors with ceremony. Under the sudden glow of a lantern, he could recognise the smiling face of a priest. The Blessed Sacrament had been removed from the tabernacle, and the first benches had been driven back so as to leave the dais of the altar and the space before it free. Against the walls stood companies of barbells and Indian clubs. The dumbbells were piled in one corner, and in the midst of countless hillocks of gymnasium shoes and sweaters and singlets, in untidy brown parcels, there stood the stout, leather-jacketed vaulting horse, waiting its turn to be carried up on the stage and set in the middle of the winning team at the end of the gymnastic display. Stephen, though in deference to his reputation for essay writing, he had been elected secretary to the gymnasium, had no part in the first section of the programme, but in the play which formed the second section, he had the chief part, that of a farcical pedagogue. He had been cast for it on account of his stature and grave manners, for he was now at the end of his second year at Belvedere, and in number 2. He let the edge of the blind fall, stepping down from the bench on which he had been standing, walked out of the chapel. At the far end of the shed near the street, a speck of pink light showed in the darkness, and as he walked towards it, he became aware of a faint aromatic odour. 2 boys were standing in the shelter of a doorway, smoking, and before he reached them, he had recognised Heron by his voice.
Here comes the noble Daedalus. Welcome to our trusty friend.
Here I am.
I was just telling my friend Wallace what a lark it would be tonight if you took off the rector in the part of the schoolmaster. It would be a ripping good joke. Go on, Daedalus. You can take him off rippingly. He that will not hear the churcha, let him be to thee as the heathener and the publicaner. Damn this blankety blank holder. It's always getting stuck like that. Do you use a holder?
I don't smoke.
No, Daedalus is a model youth. He doesn't smoke, and he doesn't go to bazaars, and he doesn't flirt, and he doesn't damn anything or damn all.
Stephen shook his head and smiled in his rival's flushed and mobile face, beaked like a bird's. He had often thought it strange that Vincent Heron had a bird's face as well as a bird's name. A shock of pale hair lay on the forehead like a ruffled crest. The forehead was narrow and bony, and a thin hooked nose stood out between the closest prominent eyes, which were light and inexpressive. The rivals were school friends. They sat together in class, knelt together in the chapel, talked together after beads over their lunches. As the fellows in number 1 were undistinguished dullards, Stephen and Heron had been, during the year, the virtual heads of the school. It was they who went up to the rector together to ask for a free day or to get a fellow off.
Oh, by the way, I saw your governor going in.
The smile waned on Stephen's face. Any allusion made to his father by a fellow or by a master put his calm to rout in a moment. He waited in timorous silence to hear what Heron might say next.
You're a sly dog.
Why so?
You'd think butter wouldn't melt in your mouth, but I'm afraid you're a sly dog.
Might I ask what you were talking about?
Indeed you might. We saw her, Wallace, didn't we? And deucedly pretty she is too. And inquisitive. And what part does Stephen take, Mr. Daedalus? And will Stephen not sing, Mr. Daedalus? Your governor was staring at her through that eyeglass of his for all he was worth, so that I think the old man has found you out too. I wouldn't care a bit, by Jove. She's ripping, isn't she, Wallace?
Not half bad.
So you may as well admit that we've fairly found you out this time. You can't play the saint on me anymore. That's 1 sure 5.
A soft peal of mirthless laughter escaped from Heron's lips, and, bending down as before, he struck Stephen lightly across the calf of the leg with his cane, as if in jesting reproof. Stephen's moment of anger had already passed. He was neither flattered nor confused, but simply wished the banter to end. He scarcely resented what had seemed to him a silly indelicateness, for he knew that the inventor in his mind stood in no danger from these words, and his face mirrored his rival's false smile.
Admit!
Confiteor Deo omnipotenti, Beati Mariae semper Virgine, Beato Micheli Arcangelo, Beato Ioanni Baptiste, Sanctus Apostolis Petro e Paolo, et omnibus sanctis quia peccavi nimis cogitationi, verbo et opere, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa.
Admit!
Oh, Daedalus, Doyle is in a great bake about you. You're to go in at once and get dressed for the play. Hurry up, you better.
He's coming now when he wants to.
But Doyle is in an awful bake.
Will you tell Doyle with my best compliments that I damned his eyes?
Well, I must go now.
I wouldn't damn me if I would. That's no way to send for one of the senior boys. In a bake, indeed. I think it's quite enough that you're taking a part in his bally old play.
A few moments after Stephen found himself on the stage amid the garish gas and the dim scenery, acting before the innumerable faces of the void. It surprised him to see that the play which he had known at rehearsals for a disjointed, lifeless thing had suddenly assumed a life of its own. It seemed now to play itself, he and his fellow actors aiding it with their parts. When the curtain fell on the last scene, he heard the void filled with applause.
I'd just like to ask all the boys to come out and take a quick bow. I think they were really wonderful. And I'm just going to hand over to Karen.
Very quickly, just want to thank you all for coming this evening and taking time out from your busy schedules to join us. Just to thank all the students and to Mr. Kenny and Mr. Maloney who helped prepare them for this evening, for the Ramparts for singing so beautifully, and finally to Dorina and Father Bruce, thank you for coming tonight. And for joining us tonight and sharing all their wisdom about Joyce and bringing us on a journey through Joyce's life. And then to close out the night, if you'd like to welcome all the Ramparts back on stage again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rory, and thanks for having us back. We're going to sing a few songs. We're the Ramparts, and we're delighted to be part of this great event tonight. We've been given some, I suppose, particular stories that connect the songs to Joyce, and we're going to start off with a song we sing pretty much every night. We go out after rehearsal. It's the El Triangle, which was, of course, written by Brendan Behan. And in typical Brendan Behan style, he referred to Ulysses as useless, but that he had a great love for the writer, penning "Weakest led James Joyce." Thanks be to James Joyce, which finishes with the lines, "If I were you and you were me, coming from Les Halles, roaring with a load of cognac, belly full on the tipple, a verse or two in my honour you'd scribble." So, without further ado, we're going to start with the El Triangle. Thank you very much.
A hungry feeling came o'er me stealing, and the mice were squealing in my prison cell. And the old triangle went jingle
Solo to that song was sung by Devin Sinnott, Sean Casey, Owen Harrington and Yanni Talcases. Our next song is a song called Loch Lomond, which is said to be a favourite of Joyce's. There are accounts of him singing it to his friend Maria Ulif in cafes in the 30s in Paris. The solo for this one is going to be sung by Mr. Philip Jebb.
By yon bonny banks and by yon bonny braes, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond,
in sunshine the waters lie sleeping, but the broken-hearted can a second spring again, and the world knows not how we are
song is called All the Fine Young Men, which is polemic against war in general, particularly the World War I and World War II. And the Joyce family themselves were refugees during both of those wars, taking refuge in Zurich both times. And when challenged on what he did during World War I, Joyce is reputed to have said that he was writing a book called Ulysses at the time. There it is.
much. Our next song is an Irish classic. It's On Raglan Road, the words of which were written by another Irish literary great, Patrick Kavanagh, and they were famously put to music by Luke Kelly of the Dubliners. Kavanagh was convinced that Ulysses was one of the greatest books ever written, proclaiming that it was a very funny book and also a very wearying book. It is almost entirely a transcription of life. And apparently it was often found by his side, and he constantly used it as a source of inspiration through its humour and cerebral qualities in equal measure. And actually when Bloomsday was initiated as a festival in 1954, Kavanagh participated in the very first staging of it with his friends Flann O'Brien and the owner of the Bailey pub, John Ryan. So we're going to sing you Raglan Road now, and the solo will be sung by Mr. Ken Roach.
On Raglan Road of an autumn day, I saw her first and knew that her dark hair would weave a snare that I might one day rue. I saw the danger, yet I passed along the enchanted way, and I said, let grief be a fallen leaf at the dawning of the day. On Grafton Street in November we tread lightly along the lane of a deep ravine where can be seen the worth of passion's pledge. The Queen of Hearts still making tarts, and I'm not making hay. Oh, I love too much, and by such is happiness thrown away. I gave her gifts of the mind, I gave her the secret sign that's known to the artists who have known the true cost of sound and stone, and word and tint I did not stint, for I gave her poems to say, with her own name there and her own dark hair, like clouds over fields of May. On a quiet street where old ghosts meet, I see her walking now, away from me so hurriedly. My reason must allow that I had loved not as I should, a creature made of clay. When the angel woos the clay, he'll lose his wings at the dawn of day. When the angel woos the clay, he'll lose his wings
Thanks very much. I hope you're enjoying the evening. And this is when we lower the tone. So, part of the Ramparts characteristic is to get everyone to sing along whenever we do a gig. So, lock the doors. I know some people are going to be definitely cringing right now, but sure, we'll give it a go, and then when we start singing along, if you don't want to, you can just start clapping your hands and stamping the ground if you like. So the next song we're going to sing is On Puck Bwilla. Yeah, aye, you know it. Fantastic. So I don't know if you know the translations, just to give you an idea, to picture the whole story. We're going to sing 4 verses from it. The first is about the narrator goes to Drumore and sees an extremely furious goat. And this is more than furious. This goat has serious anger management issues. The second verse is he goes around the town being a bit crazy, and then the narrator jumps on top of the goat. Dangerous. And then the third verse is the guards try to apprehend the goat, and then the goat actually pulls down the trousers of the guards. Now, apparently this is a true story. I'm not sure. And then the final verse is about a priest who was addressing a meeting, and he swore that the devil himself was riding on the back of the goat. Anyway, that's enough of that. And so it goes like this. Well, the second half of the refrain goes like this. Alleluia, ton puck bwilla. Give that a go. And the bit before that, we can stamp the ground and slap your knee. Okay, so it goes like this. The words are Allelu, Puellelu, Allelu, ton puck bwilla, Allelu, Puellelu. And then it does the, by the way, you're a choir. You're going to be the choir for the night. Alright, I'll meet you next year. Here we go. So, I go to this. Allelu, Puellelu, Allelu, ton puck bwilla, Allelu, Puellelu. Allelu, ton puck bwilla. Excellent. Okay, so we'll do it again, just to kind of create a bit of a crazy atmosphere and that kind of thing, reflecting the angry goat. Try not to get too angry. So we'll do this to the beat. Here we go. 1, 2, and okay, are you ready? All right.
Eg vadum shekhan drari wa bihim gores me tole mehel te kasfia me gomak yo akbakan promis er
Doremer trasna tri rilagak Issa glushon cork foden am winga Straskarta forsjes natur toiga. Is cushion and a good left when you hallelujah. Thank you for singing along. It means a lot.
Thank you for joining us on that one. This is our last song, and as such we have a fitting one. So this song is called The Parting Glass, and the parting glass was the final hospitality offered to a departing guest. They were presented with one final drink to fortify them for their travels. And this sentiment is perfect for Joyce, who left Dublin at only 22 years old, never to return, or never to live in Dublin again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Sure, we'll do one more, I suppose. Our final song is, it's actually called The Rocky Road to Dublin, which was mentioned in Ulysses, more so in Finnegan's Wake. So I hope you enjoy it, and you should check us out on YouTube as well. Enjoy the show.
In the merry month of June, from me home I started, left the girls of June, nearly broken hearted, saluted father dear, kissed me darling mother, drank a pint of beer, my grief and tears was falling, then off to reap the corn, leave where I was born, and cut the stout black corn to banish ghosts and goblins, did a new pair of brogues, rattling o'er the bogs, and frightening all the dogs, on the rocky road to Dublin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up there and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to Dublin, whackful all the ride. In Mullingar that night I rested limbs so weary, started by midnight, this morning light and airy, took a drop of the pure to keep me heart from sinking. That's a Paddy's Row when Harry's on for drinking, to see the lassie smile, laughing all the while. Had me curious thought to set her heart to bubbling. They asked if I was hard, the wages I required, till I was almost tired of the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt there and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to Dublin, whackful all the ride. In Dublin next arrived, I thought it was a pity to be so soon arrived, but here we left my city, 'twas then I took the stroll. Whackful all the ride, one full it was stolen in a neat locality. Something crossed me mind, then I looked behind the bundle, could I find upon my stick a woman inquiring for the road. He said me Connacht Road wasn't much in vogue on the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up there and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to Dublin, whackful all they ride. From there I got to wait, my spirits never faded, landed on the cages after ship was sailing. Captain Happy Ward, he said I know him mighty well, and I jumped aboard the galley, counter paddy, 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 down among the pigs, and on some funny rigs, and some hearty jigs, the water around me bubbling. When I folly head, I wish myself was dead, a better far instead, on the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up there and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to Dublin, whackful all they ride. The boys of Liverpool, when we safely landed, called myself a fool, I could no longer stand it, blood began to boil, where I was losing poor old Erin's out. They began abusing her all as also sang shillelagh, and feisty going boys were buying sawing hay, and with the loud array, the joy and the affray, quickly clear the way for the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up there and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to Dublin, whackful all they ride. Up there and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to Dublin, whackful all they ride. Whackful all they ride, whackful all they ride.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Darina and all the staff at Belvedere and at the Parents Association for inviting us. It has been truly a pleasure. Good night.
Thank you so much, everybody. That's the end of our evening. And just thanks again to the Ramparts. They're absolutely amazing. And to our two speakers, Father Bradley, to the lovely readers, and to Darina for coming to the Joyce Centre. Thank you all for your support. Thank you.